Hi everyone, this is Jason Barrick of Wall Street for Main Street. Welcome back to another Wall Street for Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest, but I've been friends with him for a couple years now. He's an inventor, he's an entrepreneur, he's founder of the Pivot brands, and he's also a technology enthusiast and futurist. Charles Peralo, thank you for joining me.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Jason. Good to be here.
Now, Charles, I know you study a lot of different technologies, but let's talk about the cryptocurrency markets first and kind of get that out of the way because, everyone's talking about it right now. It seems like, sentiment for a long time, for a year now, was just basically a mania. I'm sure you have stories like this too. There was people coming up to me, posting in my Facebook newsfeed, who I didn't even know paid attention to financial markets, who all of a sudden were crypto experts. So I saw, it was getting way too bullish.
Yeah. So the best way to sum up the crypto market is that here's the good thing. I think this is going to get people excited about next generation technologies and things such as lab-grown meats, space travel, alternative energy, AI. People will start to maybe pay attention, realizing I didn't get in on Bitcoin, but hey, I can get into some new technology here. But regarding cryptocurrency, it started off with me in 2011 going on, I believe it was like a Stefan Molyneux blog back when I was a little bit more of a fan of Stefan. And I would see in his chat groups or whatever, we'll message in each other saying, hey, yeah, there's this thing Bitcoin, I want to buy it. And you can go for $10 and buy it off of some anarchist who'd also offer to sell you some AK-47s in the process. That was the crypto market. There were no really good apps for it, no really good sites, and the storage was kind of risky. So to see that it's changed into this big thing is very exciting. But at the same time, it's something oversaturated. I think too many people are talking about it. Now I get phone calls from friends of my grandparents asking about it, and really cool stuff to think about. But there's going to have to be something better. Now, the one cool thing about crypto, though, and I will say this for investment in technology, is the ICO market. Now, I've avoided a lot of ICOs. I think people probably should until some regulations get more cleared out. But what's really cool about ICOs is it's kind of a way for entrepreneurs to skip out on the venture capital process and create sort of a lesser regulated IPO. And I think that is going to be a pretty big windfall where companies that are working on breakthrough technologies, especially AI, people are going to have sort of a pathway through with skipping the regulation. So, and I think AI will be $1 trillion industry. And, if some people can get in on the ground floor at some early ones, we're going to have people who do become millionaires and maybe billionaires off of ICOs.
How revolutionary do you think blockchain technology is going to be, though? Not counting all these cryptos, which there's still basically a speculative frenzy, although people now, if they got in on cryptos in the last couple months, they're losing a lot of money now. But the technology behind these cryptocurrencies, how revolutionary do you think it can be? How many industries do you think it can make more efficient or potentially disrupt?
So I put it like this. In 2012, everybody had to get into social media. 2013, everyone had to make an app. Then it was Google Glass. Then it was, maybe ride sharing or something like that. Now it's blockchain because the venture capital money's there. I can't really say that for a lot of applications people are building blockchain for, they're actually going to be something that everyone is going to like. And I think blockchain is a little bit too expensive to operate. What I'm paying more attention to is the company Iota, which has the Iota coin that's right now on the market, and it's not even complete yet, which they're doing a method called Tangle that they're developing, which Tangle, the goal is to replace the blockchain. So instead of having a third party that verifies things through a proof of stake or whatever, every group, basically, once you do a transaction, you're also doing the hashing. So I think that can work much better for cryptocurrency, save a lot of energy, save a lot of money, and take these high transaction costs on Bitcoin, Litecoin, and others, and really get them to zero. The difficulty is it's kind of the opposite with Iota, where Iota's technology is the less people use it, the harder it is to use, but when more people use it, it gets a lot better. Now, where I think that the Iota technology and where I think Tangle and blockchain are going to go is honestly in online gaming. And the reason for that is people love MMORPGs, but they're some of the most expensive things to run and develop, and they've been very limited because they cost, quite a bit of money to get going. So I could see a method with Iota where these basically servers are operating on your own computer, and you're helping operate this system as well. And I think using that, there could be sort of a future where you have your cell phone and you're on an app of some kind, and instead of that app hammering you with ads or hammering you with like these little like add-on fees or whatever, while you're using that app, the other part of your phone is going to help run a system for something else that would be working with a tangled method right there, or perhaps even a blockchain method there, and that's how you're going to pay for the app developer. And we're starting to see that kind of stuff come out right now. Still a little bit too early on, but as computer power gets a little bit stronger over the next couple of years and blockchain and Iota get better, I think that will be the new monetization for the App Store, and I think that will help online gaming.
That's very interesting. And our generation and the generation younger than ours, it seems, are more open to cryptocurrencies. We've embraced it more than some of the older generations first because we are used to playing a lot of video games and maybe potentially even buying things inside the game. So the people who are already doing that are far more likely to embrace cryptocurrency at first. At least that's what a lot of the surveys are saying. So you mentioned faster computing. I think, the next 10x move for computing, because, right, we've gotten on Moore's Law, we've gotten kind of to the point where it's getting really, really difficult to stack those transistors more and more, and things are slowing down with the gains on Moore's Law. So what's your opinion about quantum computing, and do we need quantum computing before we can achieve maybe more gains in artificial intelligence?
Part of me doesn't think we're actually going to need quantum computing to get farther with AI. AI is not actually so much as about computer power as people think. AI is more about actually understanding machine learning. Like when it comes to self-driving cars, for example, a lot of companies have tried to apply AI to self-driving cars, but one thing that a company, which forgive me is slipping on the name, they have been focused on machine learning through the cars. So they've operated on a budget of $1 million where everybody else is doing $1 billion, but that company, they're focused on doing two things. They have sold a product that's currently on the market where you can connect your car to your phone and it's going to monitor everything you do, which is good for, kind of some basic insurance uses, monitoring your kids or whatever. But then at the same time, it'll take all of that data and they're putting it into self-driving cars. And they have better software than what Tesla or Ford or Google or these other guys have because they're following the user. So AI is about data. It's not necessarily about computer power. Now, regarding computer power and quantum computing, it's going to happen. I don't know if it's going to happen very soon. A lot of the innovations I've seen in quantum computing are the same as what it was around 5 years ago, and that's a little bit scary. I've not seen an extreme amount of innovation there. Not a lot of people are talking about it because I think they're still trying to ride Moore's Law for a while. That'll change probably in 5 years when Moore's Law is really capped out and we're going to need quantum. But they are also looking at some other alternatives there besides quantum computing. Nothing seems to be that firm there, though. So I hope quantum happens because once that happens, we will be in a better position, but I'm not really counting the luck there. And another factor that we have to just really talk about when it comes to AI and computers is energy. The biggest issue with, obviously Bitcoin and that kind of technology right now is the high energy cost makes mining and transactions hard. Well, AI and all this other stuff is going to be the same thing. We can't live in a world where energy goes up in price, but also we have more powerful computers and more need for computers. We can't live with that. So we really need to fix up the energy issue. And whenever I see people always make the Back to the Future comparisons, what happened, why don't we have flying cars? It's not because of the software. Software has gotten more and more powerful. Software is more powerful now than what anyone predicted in the 1980s. But in the 80s, from 1950 to 1980, people were talking about energy. They were talking about nuclear power. They were talking about wind and solar. They were expecting that to replace fossil fuels. It didn't, and I kind of this is where the libertarian in me strikes out. I think of actual regulations on the energy industry to prevent that. But if energy kept up with computers, we'd probably be talking a whole different ballgame where we wouldn't even have to worry about computer power because we could run multiple computers in a more economic fashion.
That's a very good point about the energy component. I think the average person doesn't think about that. And, the society is still built a lot on fossil fuels, and it's going to be very difficult transitioning away from fossil fuels. Like the Elon Musk and a lot of the other environmentalists think the transition can occur very, very quickly. But if you go back through history at all the different transitions from one major fuel source to another, it took like about 4 years minimum. So to go from like wood to coal to whale oil, then to Rockefeller's version of refined oil products, petroleum and gasoline and diesel, it took about 40 years for each transition.
Well, it could take shorter, but it could take longer. My big thing is that we need to actually have this bipartisan movement in America, which it does look like exists. We have Janine Shannon and Cory Booker on the Democrat side, and then we can go over to the Republicans and, find a few names there who are more pro-nuclear. Sadly, the Republicans get a little bit more money from the carbon footprint guys, so they're not as willing to talk nuclear as some people. But more of like the Western Republicans, the people who are like Idaho, not really in the big oil states, they're very open to talking about nuclear power because that benefits them. Same for Montana as well. So we need a bipartisan coalition to re-regulate or deregulate the nuclear power movement because that's the future there. It's safer, it's cheaper, and if we didn't have this war on nuclear, I believe that we would be in a situation where, like, let's take California, which has this massive drought problem that they have every year. We'd probably be in a situation where we can take ocean water and convert it to salt water because energy would be so cheap. I mean, we could be looking at a situation where energy is literally a tenth of the cost it is now. And the amount of economic benefits behind that towards everything, healthcare, robotics, computers, everything always revolves back to energy. And it's just something the government doesn't really want to do. And I've seen the fossil fuel industries. These people run around and cry when oil's below $100 a barrel. They actively are working to get oil up and up and up in price. And that's why nuclear power got killed. The fossil fuel industry killed it. And I look at fracking, for example. People on the left always bash fracking because that was big business and technology. Fracking was mainly stripper wells and these smaller projects with natural gas and oil where OPEC was not involved, but OPEC was one of the big lobbies trying to kill fracking because it destroyed foreign oil, destroyed their reserves. So, I mean, they are actively predatory towards new technology. Fracking is a great technology. Nuclear is a great technology. And what they do is they sell it to large companies as, this is going to kill our business. And then they go to the environmental edge and they say, oh, nuclear is horrible. So let's just have CO2, which is terrible on the environment. Nuclear is the cleanest and safest fuel of them all. It's actually amazing that we've been so overregulated on it, and I think it's just a proof of corporatism in America, sadly.
Are you familiar with the next generation nuclear power technology, so the liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor, and how much better that is than the conventional nuclear power we have now, which is the pressurized light water reactor, where those nuclear power plants, cost at least a couple $2 billion. The permitting process takes over 10 years. You're looking at, an enormous payback period. It's just uneconomic. And then the people, like you said, a lot of everyday people do not want a nuclear power plant around them. Even if it's safe, like you said, there's still just so many horror stories that people see on the news with 3 Mile Island and Fukushima and Chernobyl that even though the probabilities say that the odds of that are unlikely, people still don't want it anywhere near them. So okay. I think that...
Oh, okay, so I'm getting what you're saying there. So the first thing is I'm going to touch on thorium because my partner Ben... he's kind of run me on some crash courses on thorium because he's more of the engineer of our partnership right there. Thorium, hypothetically, you could take a few chunks of thorium that cost very little and in the future put it into a car that actually runs on it, and that car is going to run 100,000 miles. Thorium is the future. Sadly, outside of Japan, which was a place that was very beneficial from nuclear and kind of got victimized from it, they're the only ones really invested into it. South Korea also, I believe, has one company with a name that is too South Korean for me to pronounce or remember, but they've also put some time into it. But I don't believe anyone in America has really put any time into thorium, because not only are the regulations hard to open up a plant, they're hard to just do the research on it. Like getting actually these materials and doing these tests, it costs millions of dollars just to get going.
Yep.
But the next thing regarding the actual nuclear power plants and the cost to get them operated. For people who are listening, Jason and I were just having some small talk before getting on this call, and I talked about a casino that opened up in an area I grew up in the Catskills. $1.3 billion that was invested into it, and Jason made the line, you open up a casino, the governments are resorting to legalizing marijuana and gambling, not because they think they're better now. They still, like, the people in government still think they're awful, but they need the tax revenue from it. So I think what's going to happen with nuclear power is this. Eventually some of these these areas of the country are going to have to resort to it, because there are so many towns in America where the coal mines are gone, the little manufacturing's gone, people are flying and not driving across the country, and we're just stuck with these like small little towns where, you know, nobody has a job outside Walmart and the fast food place. And then I think there's some sort of social safety net benefits that are subsidized in the town, really, which is a sad case. I think what's going to happen is some of these states and then some of these local governments, they're going to look around and see nuclear as a viable option, because you can do it almost anywhere as long as it's not earthquake hazardous, and install it, and it's going to work. And if you put nuclear in and you get large enough plants, you can send that energy from like rural Missouri, and you can send it to Florida, New York, California, and that'll create thousands of good jobs, very high-paid jobs. These people are not going to be making in upstate New York, people are bragging about their jobs as blackjack dealers and waiters, and like sharing that that's the good times. Well, once you get like 1,000 people who can work at a nuclear power plant there, making $100,000 a year, you're going to see an economy go crazy. So yeah, we need to step it up on the nuclear power. And regarding thorium, that's great, but until some regulations get blocked on the research, that's not going to happen.
There's actually one research company in the United States, is Kirk Sorensen of Flibe Energy. He did the TED Talk on it. He's done a couple of those over the last 10 years or so, and then he also did the Thorium remix on YouTube if our listeners want to go learn about liquid fluoride multi-salt thorium reactor. So there's the solid-state reactors that are like pebble bed reactors that use thorium, and there was an accident on those, but the liquid fluoride ones are actually going to be safer long-term and cheaper. But, you know, we're still at least 10 years away, and the U.S. already gave away all their intellectual property for free to the Chinese. So China has like 1,000 nuclear physicists, PhD level ones, and they have like a couple $2 billion in capital allocated to developing this over the next like 10 or 20 years and commercializing liquid fluoride molten salt thorium reactor power plants, so they could just sell it to a small city, like you said, for $80 million, and then basically on a small amount of thorium, it would have almost unlimited cheap power for a very, very long time with very minimal waste that can just be recycled. The other thing, Charles, about nuclear power, I'm a big fan of the next generation stuff, because there's just so many issues with the current nuclear power plants, especially, you know, the waste. It's just not recycled very well. The other one is commercial fusion. There's actually a lot of Wall Street money and venture capital money that's going into that. There's, you know, hundreds of millions of dollars going into commercial fusion right now. And I've actually saw on a Real Vision TV presentation last year, there was a really well-respected Wall Street guy, and he's invested in the project. He had a physics degree before he went to Wall Street, and he's adamant that they're going to get it done in 15 or 20 years. So what's your opinion on that? Do you think we're actually going to have... I know like Lockheed Martin, or one of those large defense companies, is pretty bullish on that too, that in 15 or 20 years there's going to be commercial fusion engine trucks and cars as well. What's your views on that?
Well, do you know what the saying is with fusion?
No.
It's 40 years away and always will be. So this is the good sign. If it went from 40 years away to 20 years away, maybe that's something right there. When it comes to fusion, like, people question in the physics world if it's possible, and everybody, like, the common answer a physicist will give is, well, look up at the sun. There you go, case in point, it's possible. Regarding fusion, though, if I could see it realistically in 20 years, don't really know. It depends And like everything depends on the investment. It depends on where the money goes. Like we can look at the Bitcoin space and say, why have 1,300 cryptocurrencies popped up? Why has Iota popped up? Why have all these companies got in? And it's because the money's going there. And like, I mean, it's very sad that like while I like cryptocurrencies, there's a lot of potential there. It's very sad that I see tens of billions of dollars being invested into that when if it went into fusion, hey, we could possibly get fusion. And I mean, tens of billions of dollars to something as big as that project, even that might not be enough, but if it just got us 5% closer, that means quite a bit. I don't know if we're going to get fusion in 20 years. I think thorium might be a little bit more likely. It's kind of sad the United States is not developing it a bit further. But if China's doing it, that still benefits us all. And I mean, that also just makes the point that China is not the cheap labor place anymore. I mean, China, I think, is going to be the big innovator. Jim Rogers, always says, if you want to set up anywhere, set up Asia. I can't say I fully agree with that, but he's definitely right to some extent there. And that's just the truth of the matter there. But to answer your question, though, on fusion, I think the reason why some bigger investors on Wall Street are getting into it is because sometimes investors, I feel, want to put money into projects where it's a lottery ticket. Fusion is, I think, the greatest lottery ticket of all time in terms of investments, because if it worked, if a company were to make it happen on a budget of $1 billion, they will have the next $1 trillion company, the first $1 trillion company. And that's just the fact of the matter. I mean, what it would mean for the world is limitless in potential. I mean, everything that we've talked about or are going to talk about opens up. That's why I think people are investing into fusion. Do I think they seriously believe it'll happen in 20 years? I hope so. But I have a little bit of skepticism there.
And that's a good point you brought up about China, because, China, for the last couple decades, China has been known as just a cheap labor place. They knock things off. They make cheap goods. They make stuff like plastic stuff, molded plastic injection stuff that Americans, don't need. They buy it anyway and they throw it away. But China actually, for about the last really 10 years, has actually exploded in the amount of patents that they're getting. And they're leading the way in science, technology, engineering, and math. So they're killing the U.S. in that category. The U.S. government school system is really bad at that. And so, a lot of the people who come to the United States are the ones who are excelling at those subjects. They're not actually Americans that grew up here and went through the government school system. So I think, China does have a long-term bright future. The other thing, like you said, is China's going to turn into Japan, I think, in the near future. They're already doing that transition. They're trying to do what Japan did decades ago. And so China now, their wages have gone up so much at their factory, Charles, in the last 15 years. They've gone up over 500%. Yes, they started off low, but a 500% increase in wages. The guy who owns the factory, that's probably means they're going to try to either fire the workers and automate, bring in robotics, or you have companies like Foxconn trying to move to Wisconsin, or you have the cheap labor factories that don't want to make the investments into automation and robotics. You have them wanting to move their cheap labor factories out of China to Bangladesh or India or Vietnam.
So I actually today did probably 10 to 15 phone calls with manufacturers for a product that I have patented that is a cheap plastic product that is lower cost. And, everyone I spoke to, America and China for manufacturing of a product that's this cheap and this easy to make with injection molding is pretty much the same cost. And obviously, China's still a bit cheaper. If we were to get more complex, it would be more expensive to do it in America than China, but it's definitely leveled out. And they said if you want to save a quarter, you can try India, but this is related to food, so that's a whole different safety standard I'd rather not risk right there. But you are right there with everything on that front. Now, you mentioned automation, which is a great subject to get into. For automation, a lot of people say 3D printing. I don't really think 3D printing is ever going to actually replace automation with products. It's just too much time. It's just too time consuming. Now, there are all these other things such as air-based 3D printing, lifts, things that do save a lot of time. Still not efficient enough to replace conventional injection molding or vacuum fume. Nothing really good enough there. But what I think will happen with about 3D printing, however, is, right now you can produce a sample of a product very easy, and that product can help make a mold. I think we're going to get to a phase where 3D printers are actually going to manufacture molds for companies, because right now to do an injection mold, if I want to get a very basic metal or plastic product, we're talking $20,000 to $50,000. We're not talking cheap, and to do that, it's really a hesitation on it's why a lot of products don't get made. So I think that's kind of the future with 3D printing and automation. Now, regarding robotics and automation and replacing the whole assembly line, that is going to definitely hurt some economies that have not yet done manufacturing. So, like you said, India, Bangladesh, they're growing economies because of this cheap labor market, but I think robotics and automation are coming quick enough that they are not going to get the whole benefit from it. So I think they might actually get a little bit of a bust maybe by the end of the 2020s, because they're just not going to have the competition for that. And now, where does all the automation go? So if I had to make a guess, really it's going to go towards communities that are actually related to larger cities. So I think in New York, for example, because there's such a large consumer base in New York City, I could see some factories being set up in upstate New York, in Pennsylvania, in those places where heavily automated factories are going to go. And then for San Francisco, Los Angeles, probably Washington State would be something to benefit right there. So I think those economies are going to benefit from automation, but the economies that I think are going to get killed are, like I said, Bangladesh, India, and I think these manufacturing jobs that are in the Midwest, those are still going to be a loss because, it's just cheap and easy to get them into these other locations. There's tons of factories in the East Coast and West. So the Midwest, I think, is still going to, and the South is still going to have a lot of problems, even if we transition away from China and overseas to make it here, because to get a product from China to the United States via shipping, it takes 8 to 12 weeks. So if you're a company in the toy industry or the electronics industry, it's not the most competitive thing to make overseas. People are going to want to move to America, back to America, and I think they're going to want to stay a day ahead of everyone else. So East Coast, West Coast, where the consumers are.
And to add to your points there, I think the 3D printing industry as a whole, it was trying to grow too quickly. There was too many ridiculous acquisitions. People were overpaying. The valuations were way too high. And the major mistake that the 3D printing industry made was they tried to release this retail 3D printer that would take hours to make, cheap plastic toys. And so it wasn't ready for the retail for people to put in their homes. But in terms of building that model out, like you said, making a model of something, whether it's Ford making a car or a Japanese car company making a car, or like Mattel or another toy company making a 3D printed first version of their product, that will, faster, cheaper, more efficient. The 3D printers are getting more complex. Even in the lab, Charles, I've noticed recently in the last couple months, there was a 10 times speed growth in the lab, I think at MIT, for 3D printing. And these printers are getting basically to the point now where they can almost, mix alloys. So where they can take like plastic and metal and they could kind of combine the two. We're almost there. I think ultimately, in the future, I think we're going to be able to probably 3D print graphene. So, obviously we can't do it yet. Graphene is something, we could probably have a whole show.
Graphene, I guarantee you there's going to be a breakthrough there before the end of the decade. Before Trump's up for re-election, there will be some sort of breakthrough through there. Now, regarding the actual 3D printing and the future of that industry, I don't think we're ever going to get to an industry where 3D printers exist in someone's home. I think they're always going to be a little bit too complex for people to use, always too costly. But I think like a lot of hardware shops, like what were the mom and pop hardware stores, they're going to become the 3D printing stores where they're going to have a $10,000 3D printer that's best in line, and then they will have some basic assembly robotics. So we're going to get the app store for physical products where people, like basically if you're an entrepreneur, instead of going and trying to manufacture a product, you're going to put it in this like section. Like there's going to be toys where they're going to be manufactured locally to some extent, and it's just going to work better for people. It's going to be cheaper, and that's going to be the future right there. And that's what I could picture happening. Now, what type of toys would that be? I think they'd be metal toys, plastics, and maybe even plush. Because the thing about plush is this: there are some bases where you can actually print frames for them, and then have materials get get kind of like molded around it. So if that happens, there's a lot of stuff that could happen there. Now, I'm also seeing people who are working on technology for stitching as well. And it's obviously not the same as 3D printing, but you could actually take something like clothing or stitching or sewing and get that done. So maybe there will be an economy where, like, all of these mom and pop stores, instead of being stores, they're going to be mom and pop plants for manufacturing, where people, if they want a new clothing item, they want a new toy,
or a car part.
Car part. They're going to get made there locally. And the reason it's going to happen is because the shipping time will be much lower, and it'll just be a massive improvement. And also, like something like a car part, for example, that's an enormous shipping cost. So this could save shipping, and instead of having to wait days or weeks to get it, it can go locally. So that's an interesting economy there. Now, with all these topics, though, this is, I guess, a finance-type show. So who to invest in for 3D printing, because there are some public companies there? I would say the answer is no one yet, because nobody has quite risen to move out of the penny stock market on that. And you brought it up with saturation. You're getting a lot of people who have put 3D printing in their company's names, even though they just do the same thing other people do. And most of the companies that are doing the real research are not even companies, they're universities. And the companies that do, they're either large companies that have invested in some smaller labs there. But, I mean, that's going to be the interesting thing. I mean, I'm waiting for Mattel to come out and say they have a new model. That would be pretty exciting, though, for the toy industry.
Well, 3D Systems, Triple D, stock Triple D on the NASDAQ, that stock went up tenfold. I think it went from like $6 to almost $80 at one point, then it crashed back down more than 90%. The stock hasn't done that much recently, but, you know, they do have a lot of a really big R&D budget, and they do have a really good commercial 3D printing. So they are putting behind the scenes, like you said, they are reinvesting their profits back into, you know, better, faster, cheaper machines that can do more, be more efficient, offer companies, you know, better commercial 3D printers at better models. But I think the mistake the whole industry made, and this set them back probably a long time, was they wasted a lot of time and a lot of money on the retail industry. So, you know, even MakerBot, I saw a documentary on this on Netflix a year or two ago, like MakerBot, they tried to set up retail stores, and Stratasys, you know, screwed that up. That's the retail thing, like you said, is not going to be the way that this gets done.
MakerBot was like, here's the good thing about that, about the effort the 3D printing industry made with MakerBot and like all the little retail stuff. It did get people excited. It did get people knowing what a 3D printer was. I used to talk about it, and people thought it was like just printing stuff you could look at with 3D glasses. People had no idea what it was. So now you went from like 5% of people having a proper idea of what it was to 50%, which is pretty cool. So that's the good thing about MakerBot and those other guys. Do I think they hurt themselves because they wasted money? Yes, but it wasn't my money or anyone else's money. So good for them. I mean, they helped. And you know, sometimes I guess like some of the biggest failures are what brings out an industry. The Magnavox Odyssey, which was Ralph Baer's invention in the 70s, or actually no, the 60s for video games. It was a pretty big failure on the market. They only sold 1 million when they manufactured 3 million, and it led to Nolan Bushnell making Atari, ripping them off, and they kind of did the same thing. Nolan Bushnell looked at the Magnavox Odyssey at a trade show, and he said this is way too expensive. It only works with people thought it only worked with a Magnavox TV. And it's just not good enough quality for someone to go out and spend, adjusted for inflation, $200 on. So he went to he went to this pizza place in California and said, I'll sell, would you make Pong? And he got, what the hell is his name? Al Alcorn, the creator of Pong. They developed it, very simple game, easy to understand, and they put it into a pizza place, and it was a hit there. When they the machine, they actually got a call their first week saying, hey, your machine's broken, and they were just kind of sitting there, it's like, oh, what's going wrong? Because they had some big fears. They go in there, and the reason why it's broken is because because it's stuffed with quarters. It was filled, and it broke capacity. So I think that's going to, so I 3D printing, that's a metaphor for that. And that's with every industry, like, that's the future. Just because it didn't succeed at first doesn't mean there can't be a path for it. Like, for example, Google Glass, I think, can go down in history as one of the biggest failures of R&D, like on wearables. But, you look at it and it taught you, it didn't really say the technology was shit, even though I think Google Glass kind of was, but it said what to do and what not to do. People do not want to wear headgear and make a fashion statement from technology. But then you look at the Apple Watch, which is technically a wearable, and the Apple Watch has been a pretty big success. Maybe not as big as some people thought, but still big enough. That definitely proves how to do a wearable. So failure leads to success sometimes. It definitely makes a roadmap there.
And it inspires people and promotes competition. But like my friend Doug Casey says, the pioneer, sometimes you don't want to be the first mover, even though companies promote that as marketing. The first mover, the pioneer, gets shot full of arrows. So, and other people learn from the mistakes of the person going first without getting shot full of arrows.
Well, what I always bring up, and I guess this will be for anybody who is invested in Apple stock or thinks they should invest in them. Apple, a lot of people say, oh, they're not innovating anymore. And what I bring up is Apple has never really innovated. They were not the first computer. They were not the first MP3 player. They were not the first tablet. And they kind of were the first smartphone, but even that, they were the first rectangular, all touchscreen smartphone, but definitely not the first, you can go on the internet and do some checks with that smartphone. So they really have never been first to market with anything. They've been second, third, fourth, fifth, maybe even more, but they just figure out the faults with it. Make technology and kind of because I look at technology investing and I sort of see a situation where it's you have these really great guys, but as Mark Cuban would say, inventors make pretty mediocre businessmen, and engineers make the worst businessmen. So you get these engineers together who raise $10 million for a company. They get it going, and it's marketed completely the wrong way. Let's look at the augmented reality market. Magic Leap, which they did mixed reality, that's $1.5 billion. They're essentially a Google subsidiary. I don't think that company is going to go anywhere. I think they failed because the mixed reality model doesn't work the way they thought it would, and now AR seems up to grabs for other people. I'm going to make a wild bet Magic Leap never really releases anything good, and it will go down as one of the biggest venture capital failures in history.
I was going to transition to augmented reality, but first I wanted to ask you a question. Last thing about 3D printing is if you notice that it's showing up on all these different movies and TV shows for science fiction. On the new Netflix movie that was just released last week, The Cloverfield Paradox, they had a 3D printer, a really nice one, on the movie on the spaceship, so that it could make anything, and it made like a 3D printed gun and a few other things there as well. So it is getting more embedded in culture. People are getting more exposed to it. There are some augmented reality plays, not the one you mentioned though. There's actually a military company that's making headsets for soldiers now and airplane pilots. I forgot the name offhand. I'll have to.
No, I've seen them. I forgot the name also, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them. So we're starting to see at the trade shows, whether it's consumer electronics or other. So the military is obviously going to get a lot of these products first because you can put a lot of vital information on the screen where the soldier can still see. They can zoom in with the video, and then they could see the other pertinent information through their eyeglass as well. So yeah, Google Glass commercially was a failure, but it definitely has inspired other people to innovate in other industries with similar technology.
Yeah, and someone watched a new Cloverfield movie. I was kind of shocked about that. Yeah, but that's 100% true at that point in time. And I don't know. I guess now we talk about AR.
Yeah, augmented reality. There's a lot of money going in there. I think a lot of our listeners have probably seen the Star Wars augmented reality characters that are being developed now. There was some type of test in the last year or so. There's a big augmented reality studio down in Florida. I forget. There's a lot of venture capital money going into the guy's operation.
So they're actually connected to Magic Leap, the company I mentioned. The thing about Magic Leap was they were based out of Boca Raton, which very rare for a tech company to be based out of there. And I don't think the actual hardware they've worked on is going to go anywhere. But because Magic Leap is there, a lot of other AR startups actually moved to the Boca Raton area, maybe Fort Lauderdale. And also, Disney is actually doing some stuff with Star Wars. So for Magic Leap, I don't think their hardware is ever going to go anywhere. But hey, when you have over $1 billion invested and you put money into other things, they might succeed on the software end. And if they do have that Star Wars contract with Disney, that can work. Now, regarding AR as a business, because a lot of people ask me, like, or they just ask in general, AR versus VR, who's going to win? And like, why do you always have to put two completely different things against each other? VR is really awesome, but VR is more for games, education, and things like that, movies. AR is more applicable to actual, like, real life skills. Like AR you could wear a headset, and if you need to like fix something in your home, it could show you how to do case in point and make it very easy. Now, regarding augmented reality and how that all works with like the entertainment industry, Pokemon Go made it happen, and Pokemon Go wasn't even real AR. It was a very basic like treat of what the actual applications are going to be. So AR is going to be small business. It's going to be like people who are teams of 10 developing apps where you can like get chased, like you can make a video with your friends being chased by a dinosaur or something cool like that. It's going to be simple games. So there's going to be thousands of AR apps on the market soon, and pretty much every smartphone's adjusted for it. It's going to be very cool to see. Now let's actually equate this to stocks though. It's once again Disney and Apple. They're the big guys doing it. Sadly, I don't think Warner is doing anything like that impressive with AR. I don't think Nintendo's doing anything with AR. So there are some companies that are going to miss out on the boat, but Disney and Apple definitely know what they're doing there.
Yeah, I try to look up the augmented reality company. I couldn't find it right now. I'll have to look it up and try to put it in the show notes for later. But in terms of investment companies, for robotics and automation companies, I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but, there's a robotics ETF, and it doesn't do very well because a lot of the companies in it are really large corporations like ABB and others. So the majority of their business is not on robotics and automation. It's only ABB, I think their revenues are only like 30-40% robotics. So it's not a pure play for robotics, but I've had success speculating on some of these smaller robotics companies where they're making revenue, they're getting close to profitability. In 2013, I bought Adept. They were featured on a documentary on 60 Minutes, and so they were automating all these factories for a lot of large corporations. They had about 10 or 20 large corporations as customers, and the stock in 2013 went from $3 a share to 16, so a five-bagger before it got bought out. But basically, like, if you can find a small robotics company that's a pure play, whether they're in the medical field and they're designing disruptive like robotic surgical system, or they're trying to automate a factory, or even they're trying to do like these security guard robotics companies. These are interesting. These are obviously not safe investments, but they're very interesting speculations.
I actually think some of these companies could be safer investments. I think these technologies like robotics are going to go mainstream in the medical space. I spoke to a urologist 2 weeks ago. He was telling me that due to some changes in robotics, he himself has not actually had to personally go into anyone's body in a year now. That's going to be the future with all of medicine. You're still going to have doctors, but doctors are going to focus on a couple of different things. Doctors are going to focus on overseeing everything, and that's just kind of the key right there. Now, the other thing with doctors are, for years you got told, like, if you want, because my father is actually an orthopedic surgeon who does bones.
Oh, really? So's my dad.
Oh, are you serious?
Yeah, he's retired, though.
Oh, my dad's about to be retired, so that is a funny coincidence right there. But no, my father's an orthopedic surgeon, and, for years you got told, like, the best way to be a doctor was to do neuro, to do cardio, and to do ortho. And then, your father being a doctor, he probably looks down on everything that's not one of those three as well. I think that like what's going to happen here, though, is when it comes to robotics changing the medical space, dental, I don't think will have much of a change because dental is still very sensitive to actually, like, I don't think robots are getting in people's mouths anytime soon. Ortho,
well, they can do precision. I mean, eventually maybe, but not. I haven't seen any units yet for dental, but with the precision.
They can do precision, but that is going to be a tougher one over the next, like, I don't see that one being anytime soon. A lot of the internal stuffs, like the urologists and things like that, are going to happen. I think cardio is going to be the one that's actually the most in trouble. But regarding medicine and where I think doctors are going to have to head, I think they're going to have to head more into the direction of research doctors with genetics. Because, you know, for years, a lot of like people who got into the medical field and were going to undergraduate school, they were in this like phase where it was like you got looked down on for being a PhD. It was MD, not PhD. That like PhD was where people who couldn't get into medical school went. I think we're going to enter a phase where the real doctors are going to be geneticists, and we're going to have doctors who are not MDs, they're PhDs interacting with actual people, which is kind of a scary thought because I've seen the social skills of MDs versus PhDs. I'm not sure they're going to be the best people there, but it's going to happen over time. And I also, my partner Ben, he originally wanted to go to medical school, but then he decided to get a PhD in chemical engineering. And his logic behind that was, he said, you know, being a doctor doesn't quite pay what I'd like it to be. And, you know, at this point in time, everyone who he sees becoming a doctor are people who mainly got pressured into it due to family or other factors, not people who, like, really wanted to, like, help. Not help. Not people, how do I describe this? The people who, like, the reason he did not become a doctor was because money was not good enough there. And then at the same time, you have to be committed to one practice your whole life. So I think a lot of the people who...
The healthcare system... Sorry to interrupt you. The healthcare system is also, if I could chime in my 2 cents here, based on my dad telling me all these things and my personal experiences, I mean, the healthcare system screwed up, and the doctors have gotten... The doctors have gotten commoditized now. So, you know, the doctors decades ago used to...
Well, if your father's an orthopedist like my father, we've probably heard the same Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner rants about the medical industry our whole lives. But, you know, it has become commoditized. And, you know, I do actually feel bad for the doctors. I mean, I was actually with my father recently at a store, just like getting some basic groceries with him walking around. And it's kind of amazing because, you know, I mean, he's kind of in a smaller town, not like Manhattan, what I'm used to. And he's like, you know, he goes into a store, and I would say I've never seen him go into a restaurant and store where people aren't shaking his hand, walking in there. So there's a very personal thing with doctors and patients, and I think the medical industry kind of ignores that, and that's the biggest problem there. But to just go into what this all means for the market, with more doctors being like roboticized, you know, it's going to be like an interesting experience for the healthcare industry. But I think those people, instead of being doctors, they're going to focus on genetics. They're going to focus on more personalized medicine, and that's going to be the case.
And if people want to invest in medical robotics companies, there are smaller ones, but I would warn you guys about that because I've seen firsthand that basically the 2,000-pound gorilla in the room is Intuitive Surgical, and I've seen them firsthand basically use the FDA. Maybe they have the FDA bought and paid for. Maybe the FDA is pick and chosen winners. I'm not quite sure. But, you know, basically this government agency with the FDA, I've seen Intuitive Surgical get FDA to deny a competitor machine from a smaller company where it was delayed for a year or two. And so this other company, the stock was doing well. They had released video and all the technical specs on this machine that was a lot cheaper for hospitals to buy and more efficient, and it did a lot more precision and intricate surgeries at a lower price than Intuitive Surgical's Da Vinci machine. And Intuitive Surgical got that product delayed by the FDA for a couple years, and Intuitive Surgical had like a competing product out and the other company's stock collapsed.
Well, let's also look at, like, I mean, when it comes to medicine, let's look at something like Theranos, which, if we're going to talk about Magic Loop, let's talk about the actual biggest venture capital fail in history, which was Theranos. It got I believe, $1 billion invested into it, and it went from $10 billion valuation at one point to zero in a period of 12 months. They had the Walgreens deal, they had the Safeways deal, and they were doing blood tests where they could use basically less blood to get better diagnostics. And
wasn't only one drop or two drops they claimed could get better results than an entire vial or two?
Well, that was the dream. I don't think they were ever going to get that, or like eventually they'll get that. But at the time they were still using less blood than what it takes now. They instead of having to sit there and be queasy after and be told you can't drive for half an hour or getting rejected because of blood sugar levels, they were more of they were skipping out on that. But they were getting the same results, if not better, than some other big company. And because they bypassed some laws by the FDA, they got destroyed. They got completely removed, and the company's sadly dead now, where they're just trying to sell off equipment and IP. And that can happen to anyone in the medical technology space. And that's just it's unbelievable. And I don't think Theranos was as good as what it was cracked up to be. I would still label it as a venture capital failure that was deserved. But to think that something that big, where if Theranos wanted to do an IPO and they were put on the NASDAQ, they would have probably at the time, during their real peak, due to the venture capital names that were on board, due to some of the contracts, they would probably have the same market cap as Snapchat has now, and they'd have twice what Twitter has. They'd probably be a $20 to $30 billion company. So to think that something like that can shut down so easily in healthcare, it's kind of insane, and it's very scary for investors.
That's a great point. Yeah, I mean, these government agencies, as a libertarian, I really don't trust them. And I've spoken to people who used to work at these government agencies off the record, and I've just heard horror stories about waste, fraud, corruption, abuse. And then as an investor, I speculated in biotech in the past, and I've seen it where basically the unfair thing about FDA is all these big pharmaceutical companies sit on the board, on the approval panel at the FDA, and if the large pharmaceutical companies want, they can basically kill an approval process for a small company, even if it's innovative and they have good intellectual property and the drug is making progress, they can get it killed. And then the stock collapses, the small biotech can't raise capital, and then the big pharmaceutical company, even though they know that there was the potential there, they could have blocked it and gone in and buy up the patent cent for pennies. I've seen it done before.
And this is the saddest thing of it all. Peter Thiel, who is someone who I admire, voted for someone I do not admire, Donald Trump, and gave him a very strong and very solid endorsement, which is sad. And, Peter Thiel, I think the reason he did that was because he wanted the FDA. And there was a very strong rumor that Donald Trump was going to appoint Jim O'Neill, who's Peter Thiel's right-hand man in a lot of stuff, to be the head. Jim O'Neill is a guy I've met probably 20 times. I've spoken to him many times. He's a great person. Jim O'Neill is a believer that, the FDA is hurting people and hurting small business and hurting labs and researchers. And Trump did not appoint O'Neill, and Trump appointed someone who I think was even worse than what Obama had in place and worse than what Bush had in place. And it's very sad because the FDA regulations are getting harder, and it looks like Big Pharma won on that one. And I mean, this is one of the things where libertarians really screw up, because there is a very clear argument the FDA needs to change, but they have been over-radicalized, and they start pointing out these conspiracies. They start talking about fluoride and GMOs and stuff that is completely ridiculous. And then they undermine the real argument, which is that we've overregulated biotech and the FDA, and because of that, people aren't investing in the small firms. There aren't enough biotech entrepreneurs, and we get billions of dollars in venture capital go into apps and not cures for cancer. And I mean, I remember speaking with Peter Thiel at a convention casually once, and his line was this: if it wasn't for the FDA, we would have cured aging by now. People would not be getting older. And
wow.
I don't know if that's Peter Thiel's been wrong a lot. He was, I think, wrong on Trump, but I think we would be in a far better world if the FDA was not in place, or at least not in place as much as now.
Well, Peter Thiel, Charles, he looks like he's about 20 or 30 years younger than he really is. So I think, he talks about anti-aging. I think he's on some really experimental anti-aging stuff?
I think for him, I think it's marijuana.
I don't think that's doing it. I think he's on some really. I think he probably signed up to be in a study. There's supposedly Patrick Cox. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there's some stuff from BioTime, which is doing stem cell. And I think, Peter Thiel, where basically they can reprogram stem cell. I think Peter Thiel may be involved in that. He might be one of those patients that signed himself up for that stuff, doing experiments.
It wouldn't shock me. It would not shock me if I would, because anti-age is one of his biggest advocates. One of his biggest things. He's invested in some stupid stuff. For example, he invested in a company where the goal is to provide people blood transfusions from young people's blood, which not really the best strategy there. There's probably nothing beneficial to it. The only thing you get is a quick high from the blood that's coming into you, but besides that, nothing that's actually going to make people younger. Anti-aging technology is probably the most exciting thing that people don't bother to learn because they've accepted aging as part of life.
We'll be right back with Charles Peralo after a word from our sponsor.
Do you work out routinely and eat healthy almost all the time? If you eat paleo or vegan or work out routinely, you may be eligible to save up to 33% off on your life insurance thanks to Health IQ. Health IQ is a venture capital-backed, big data technology life insurance company that offers customers life insurance at special rates by using the latest technologies. For more information, please go to healthiq.com/WS4MS. That's healthiq.com/WS4MS. BioTime, which is a publicly traded one, couple dollars a share. They have really good intellectual property. I think they bought up a couple other stem cell companies. So, are you a big believer in that long term in that industry?
So for BioTime and what they're doing with stem cell, the good thing is that stem cell is no longer under the same regulatory scrutiny it was like a decade ago. I'm a huge believer in stem cells. It's obviously going to be something that, everything comes down to stem cells. It's like cancer, even HIV, it can relate to that. So, do I believe in BioTime and these other companies currently available? The answer is going to be yes. And there's also an application which people don't really think about, and that's on the AI side of things with stem cell technology. Because the thing about stem cell technology is that there are a lot of specifics with the actual technology itself in terms of diagnostics and then placement. So basically, we're going to have to do a lot of analysis on people and how computers process that. So it wouldn't shock me if some more companies pop up there. But of course, I'm excited about the stem cell research process.
So you mentioned the ability for computing power. That's also something with Moore's law that has come down. It used to cost like $1 billion, I think, to map the first human DNA, right? About 20 years ago, and now it's $100 now for 23andMe or the other one?
23andMe, that company, it's very said that they can do a little bit more with the technology, they probably will do more, but they have such a great brand name and such a great company overall that I think that they're going to get away from these simple DNA tests where you can see what ethnicity you are, and they're going to move into disease and diagnostics, and I think they are going to be one of the great companies of America right there. Now, regarding the actual DNA test and that whole process, when the Human Genome Project was done, it was the 1990s version of the mission to the moon. It was so amazing, and it was basically because you had to go to Iceland, where the most people had the most similar DNA, isolate the differences, and it was an interesting process of seeing how people, a person who is a 7-foot tall individual of maybe Asian origin is the same is 99.99% the same as someone who is a Spanish person who's 4.5 feet tall or something like that. So it was very amazing how they just did the genetics right there of actually taking people and how that whole process works. And that's why it's so much more expensive. It's not really the computer end. It's more of just all the research ends are figured out, and there's pretty much no gene we're not aware of that exists. But for actually the analysts and doing genetic testing, there was Luke Nosek's Halcyon Molecular, which failed. That company was trying to do a $1,000 DNA test, full DNA test. 23andMe still doesn't quite do that just yet, and they failed let's see, they failed, I believe 2015 was when it officially ended there, and now 23andMe is pretty much the leader on that front. But yeah, DNA tests, the costs have fallen quite a bit, and with computers and DNA, the next phase is actually DNA editing, which Tristan Roberts, who's a researcher in Florida, he's actually set up some labs where people can apply these editors to themselves, and things such as HIV prevention, muscle mass growth, hair loss prevention, they can actually modify people. So they're actually bypassing FDA codes by basically making people self-researchers. And that's going to be the next boom right there, to see if people can modify. And they're actually saying that they could take someone who is let's say a child below the age of 12, do some DNA modifications, they can make them actually eventually grow to be taller. So if someone's a kid and doesn't like the genes they've got, things such as muscle mass increase or even height, like getting someone several inches taller, could be very well in the realms of possibility for children. And that's just an amazing, that is honestly just an amazing thing to think about. And
without taking human growth hormone?
Well, here's the thing. Human growth hormones for children, to actually get them a few inches taller, is definitely a thing that happens, and it does cause some problems. This could potentially cause some problems, because the thing about genetics is we don't quite know how one gene plays into another. Like, is this going to be a house of genes?
Well, yeah, we're playing God, right? So when you start gene editing, you're basically playing God.
Yeah, and I don't think that's going to be the biggest problem there. But I guess that's that topic, and we're going to have to see. Sadly, there's no companies actually playing into this market right now. And most of the technology they're doing is actually going to be in the public domain. They're not filing a lot of patents. So I guess good for the world, bad for people who want to make money.
Yeah, so in the last couple minutes of this interview, because we've gone a little over an hour here, I didn't expect us, but I've enjoyed learning about the different technology industries from you. So if I could summarize a lot of the technology industries, I think there's a lot of excitement coming in the next decade or two, but a lot of these companies, there is a lot of potential there, but a lot of these companies are still pretty small. They're pretty speculative. Some of them have a good amount of revenue, but they're not consistent profitable for most of these technologies.
Regarding the actual blue chip stock crowd here, definitely Alphabet, Google is the greatest company to put into. They're investing in Calico, which is doing anti-aging technology. They have AR through Magic Leap, which, while I don't think so, that's just one of many AR investments. So if you want to invest in a company that is going to stay around, not go away, and will be involved in all of this other stuff to come, definitely go for Alphabet and Calico and Google, everything they have there.
They bought the best robotics company too. What is it? Boston Robotics or Boston Dynamics. So they're making the Atlas robots and all those video robots that we see on the YouTube videos with like the training with the soldiers, the donkey one that can carry equipment, and then the Atlas one that can do like push-ups and has agility.
Yeah, and I mean, then we're also looking at like Facebook stock. They're working on new methods to do text messaging, where people do text messaging without a phone. And that's basically via some very small wearables. Sony has patents on eyewear that does that can do video. So the big companies are definitely staying competitive. Regarding the small companies, this is where I got into the initial point of the call with the ICOs, because, a lot of these small companies in the technology space don't quite offer the best through the regulations of going public. And that's one of the problems right there. So what I would say is that we need to really monitor the ICO market and see how that's going to change the game there. But if I could put any advice on to people, what companies to look for right now, definitely anything AR or VR, because there are going to be smaller companies coming out with AR and VR content, and those are going to get bubbles very quickly. Regarding biotech, I would ignore that for the next 3 to 5 years to some extent, because I don't think anyone's going to come up with something that substantial that they're going to become a $100 billion company from and be the real game changer. And I'm sure there's a lower market exchange company that's going to go to billion. I'm positive it must exist somewhere, but not quite that confident. And also, most of those biotech companies that have something good, they're already looking at market caps that are 50 to 250 million on the lower exchange end. And I don't see them growing past 5 billion. And I think they can also turn to zero very easily. So when it comes to the future, I would sadly ignore biotech and nuclear, at least for the next couple of years. Sadly, it's still a software game, and I think AR and VR is going to be the ultimate winner of what we've discussed today. And then the big winner will be AI. And do I think there's companies like Zeta Global which could become the trillion-dollar AI guys? Yes. Do I think that there's going to be a lot of people showing up randomly who do machine learning that we have not seen in around exchanges? Yes, indeed, as well. So this is all an analytics game, but if I can say with some safety, the next bubble that will come in the next couple of years where people are going to make money, it's going to be AR, because it's going to be something every consumer will know how to understand. It's going to be something that you're going to get casual investors like buying the apps and then wanting to invest in the companies, and you're going to get a ton of companies doing AR. Like there will be a pizza delivery app that is somehow going to install AR to it, and that's going to be something that the market's going to have to react to. So that would be my stance on the investment right there. I think AR and VR are going to be the winners for future technologies before the year 2020, and then hopefully we get biotech, energy, and some other cool stuff. But right now, AR, VR companies.
And we're also seeing all the video game companies, either they've released a cheap version of like an augmented reality headset that applies to a game or two, and so that technology is going to continue to improve going forward. So we're just in the early stages of them releasing those models. But we didn't get to cover a lot of topics today. We're over an hour, like I said. So, I have down space travel and space exploration. We'll have to save that for another.
We'll talk about what Elon's doing another time.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. But I think, the other industry that I really like that I think is a pretty safe bet for technology is cybersecurity, because governments and large corporations, they're constantly being attacked by either corporate hacking, or by government. So governments are trying to hack in and steal, patents or other secrets, or governments are hacking each other. And I think the industry as a whole, a lot of corporate America is very underinvested in cyber. So that industry could grow for 9% per year. It's always going to be like a cat and mouse game where they have to spend money on defense tech.
Yep, and that I think would fall a little bit more into the AI field for sure. But you're right, cybersecurity. The more people who have anything cyber, the more people cure it. So I think that's pretty much it right there.
Well, Charles, I really enjoyed this discussion. Hopefully, even though we didn't mention a whole bunch of company names, hopefully our listeners get that there's a lot of exciting things coming on the horizon, provided that there's not an enormous global financial crisis and there's not a potentially large global war in the next 5 or 10 years. There is a lot of innovation coming down the pipe in the next 10 or 20.
Yeah, and the other thing is, the reason why I didn't bring up a lot of company names in specific is this, because, when it comes to bringing up companies and what they're doing, everything is changing so quickly that I see these companies that pop up one day on the market and then they're down the next. And it's just something where investing it's more of like, when it comes to technology investing, it's almost an invest in principles type game over invest in specifics, because you have to know what's coming up in the next 24 months. With a technology like AR, the movers and shakers I still think are going to be the big companies. But then when the big companies release something like the next big software, the next, like the technology and the hardware that makes it better, that's when the smaller guys are going to come in. So sadly, investing in the future is very much investing in the present. There's no company on the market that I can safely say is going to be the company to cure aging. It's more so there's an economics to it all, and that's just something we're going to have to work out and wait to see what happens there.
Well, thank you for your time, Charles, today. And if our listeners want to follow more of your work, maybe keep track of some of your technology updates, do you have a newsletter or an email list that you have?
Well, you can always follow me at Charles A. Peralo at Twitter or Instagram, where I'm pretty active on those networks. Also, I've co-founded the site Right News, and I was the co-founder of BeInLibertarian.com. So when I'm not talking the political stuff, which I'm talking less and less these days, the business and technology stuff is a lot more of my focus there.
Great. Well, thank you for your time, and we'll have to have you back on, because I think this is some very interesting stuff. Besides,
we're going to talk rockets next time.
Yeah, I mean, look at what just Elon Musk just did was impressive, and he's going to lower the cost of rockets platform on land.
Yeah, and he beat the government at it. He beat NASA.
Yep. Well, he does have a lot of former NASA employees there, right? So, but
that's true. But he hired the people the government decided they couldn't afford anymore. You have a great day, and thank you for being on.